So, thank you for joining us, Mr. Todt. And you are the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Road Safety. You also chair the International Peace Institute and the Sue Foundation. And you have decades of leadership from Motorsports to the UN, and you've been always a global voice for safer roads. So thank you for being here. And let me start with asking you that you've been long advocating to road safety, to be seen not just as a moral issue, but an economic one too. So why do you think global institutions are still underinvesting when it comes to road safety, and what needs to be done?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for hosting me in this panel during the FII. In fact, road safety is a burden for the victims, for the family, for the surrounding, but also for the economy. In the planet, you have over 8 billion population and 8 billion road users.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the figures. 1.2 million people die on the road every year. About 50 million people are injured with disability. So, mainly for the low and middle income countries, it's absolutely devastating. And in fact, I produced a book which I presented during the ministerial meeting in Marrakesh in February this year, where all member states were invited to participate, and I call it a silent pandemic on the road, because it's something which is hitting potentially everybody, and we don't speak enough about it. So some countries in the developed world have significantly addressed that. I'm French. 50 years ago, you had 18,000 people dying on the road every year. Last year, we had 3,200 people who died on the road and about 20,000 people who have been injured. Saying that, and it's something I mentioned before this panel, the cost for the French government of those 3,200 deaths and 20,000 injured people is 120 billion US dollars, which is huge. Globally around the world, the World Bank is evaluating the cost at 4 trillion every year.
Wow.
So it's a loss, of course, for the victim, for the family, but also at the world level for the economy. And contrarily to other pandemics, we have the prescriptions. It's around education, law enforcement, quality of vehicles, quality of roads, quality of road infrastructures, and of post-crash care. And to give you, a bit dynamic, the best countries have 2 deaths for 100,000 population. The worst countries have 35 deaths. So the discrepancy from the best to the worst is 2 to 35. So in my capacity of Special Envoy to the Secretary General of United Nations, I work with governments, with global organizations, with the private sector, to try to influence, to change it. 90% of the figures I've been mentioning to you are located in low and middle income countries. And then simple things like buckling the safety belt in the front, in the rear of the car, wearing a proper helmet, and I will come back on this helmet which you have on the table, speed control, drink and drug driving, and text driving would immediately reduce the number of victims by 2. And I mean, for your information, road safety is also amongst SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals 3.6, with the goal to halve the number of victims by 2030. And also something we don't think when we are privileged to be in the developed world is public transportation, access to public transportation. And you know, it's considered, it is a human right. But unfortunately, in the developing world, there is not a proper public transportation. And something else which we don't speak, which is also a big burden for the economy, is traffic congestions, which are the link with road safety. But here, it's globally. In all the big cities around the world, you have traffic congestions. And what does it mean? It means time lost, tiredness, money, and pollution.
Yes.
And you know, it's simple. Why is that? Because 80 years ago, the world population was 2.2 billion people. Now, the world population is over 8 billion. And the cities, except cities like where we are, which are modern cities, which have been built recently, but all the other cities have been built for horse carriage. And we are facing that, you know. And again, the most vulnerable, those who are paying the biggest cost are in the developing world where there is a poor public transportation. So here is a problem, you know. So now the next step is how can we influence governments, leaders to address that properly.
I will come to this point. I will come to this point, Mr. Todt. But, you know, we always think about it from different perspective. What was considered previously as a risky way to commute and transport, which is by airplanes, now it is the safest way to commute. And this is because of these strict rules and regulations, and it was implemented globally. Why don't we have something similar when it comes to roads?
So it's a good point. You know, I mean, on airplanes, when there is a crash, the whole people in the plane disappear. But saying that, I mean, to give you, I mean, a figure, 550 people die every year in plane crashes compared to 1.2 million. So you see the discrepancy. And, but simply it's around regulation control. You know, the planes are regularly checked, controlled, very safe. And then the discipline. You know, the pilots in the plane, they have a checklist. Every flight, they have a checklist before taking off, while they are taking off, while they are in the air, before landing. So, I mean, it's a drastic discipline which does not exist on the road, unfortunately. You know, and it comes to what I was mentioning earlier, law enforcement. Law, you know, if law is not enforced, then it becomes a jungle.
You just touched on the political will. And today, you're working with so many leaders around the world, Mr. Todt. But why do you think when it comes to road safety, it doesn't bring this kind of political attention to it as much as it should be? Because what you just discussed now, these are really scary numbers. Why does it get their attention? Is it because of capital? Is it because of political reasons?
Because you get used to this situation, you know. And in fact, if you are living in Switzerland and you arrive in a country in Africa, you are shocked. But if you are living all the time in your place in Africa or in some places Asia, in Latin America, you are used to that. So you need a wake-up call. You know, and I was mentioning France, like it occurred 50 years back in Europe. You know, EU had, when I was mentioning the numbers in France, but it's valid for all the EU countries and some other countries around the world where there is discipline. And I mean, guess who are the best country in Asia? It's Japan and South Korea, because there is more discipline. So they have addressed that. They have changed that. Other countries, they leave it going. They leave it as it is because they don't think enough. You know, but even going back to an example of France, I was mentioning to you
Yes.
the cost for the French government. But today, everybody has heard that there are a lot of problems to be able to achieve a proper budget in France. But can you imagine if the French government would decided to put more attention on what is happening on the road, to divide by 2 the number of victims? It will be a saving of 50 billion, $60 billion. Nobody thinks about that. And in a way, that should be a popular move, because it's just to save life.
So maybe we need to invite the politicians to read your book again. Mr. Todt, having led the FIA and worked for motorsports safety, you've been in Formula One's FIA, you have been racing, you have been a driver for also, this is how your career started, as we were just discussing. So what kind of cultural or regulatory today lessons can road system take from this sport?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, clearly, motorsport always was written on the badge. Motorsport is dangerous. Motorsport over the years have become much less dangerous. And you take pinnacle of motorsport, which is Formula One, between, you know, in the years 60, 70, 80s, every year, more than 10% of the drivers lost their life in motor racing. And since Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger died in Imola in '94, so between '94 and 2025, in 31 years, it has been one death. Jules Bianchi in Japan, Suzuka. Today, it will not occur because between the death of Jules Bianchi and now we have put in place what is called the halo. It's the protection of the head of the driver. So motorsport has become much safer. Why? Because effort has been put on the car's safety, on the circuit safety, and on the equipment of the drivers and on the officials. You will remember cars catching fire. It doesn't happen anymore. So that's a great thing. The idea is that motorsport has to be considered also as a laboratory. And I was mentioning, I said I will come back on the helmet. You know, when I was the president of the FIA, I asked our engineers, help me to define one helmet, which is to be considered like a vaccine, because in all the developing world, you see the main way of transportation is with the two-wheelers. So you end up with 2, 3, 4, 5 people on a motorbike, which is sometimes 30, 40 years old age. They don't wear a helmet. If they do wear a helmet, I mean, it's fragile, it breaks like a glass, you know. So the whole idea was to try to define one helmet with a proper UN standard, ventilated and cheap. And this helmet is produced below $20 US. So what I'm trying to do is also engage government to make as a rule, when you will buy a motorbike, you can only buy the motorbike with 2 UN standard helmets, which is a revolution. You know, when you buy a car with safety belts. So when you will buy a motorbike, you will buy your car with 2 UN standard helmets. And definitely, we should be able, if the government is taking this opportunity to reduce drastically the number of victims on the road.
That's amazing. And this is probably a helmet that could be for everyone. Mr. Todt, let me ask you this. Today, as you know, there's lots of investments going to AI, data centers, and this is a big part of the FII summit today. But let me ask you as well, is it possible to make our roads smarter? Since we're always talking about these developments in artificial intelligence, can our roads be smarter?
You know, we are talking a lot about autonomous car, about a lot of new technology, which incidentally are revolution. But I mean, what is fascinating, mobility on the road is quite new. It's just over 100 years. So when you see the progress which have been made, it's a bit like aviation you were talking. It's new ways of transportation. So autonomous car, will be a fantastic step. Unfortunately, it will take many, many decades before it arrives. And, going back on road crashes, 90%, I mentioned earlier, are occurring in low and middle-income countries. Average of the vehicle, cars and motorbike, is over 30 years old age. So if you see the number of victims every year, if you see that the age of the vehicles, in a dream world, we could expect that in 40, 50 years, the world could have access to more autonomous cars. But you see the number of victims in the meantime. So you need to address that urgently before. You have a lot of new technologies which are game changers, which are used, which are very cheap. ESC, electronic stability control. In all the developed countries, it's compulsory. So we need to give access to those regulations, ABS on motorbike, anti-braking system. So all that is cheap, is available, and needs to be enforced. You know what happens in the developed world? Vehicles are limited with the age. So after 8 to 10 years, you cannot use them anymore. So what happens? They are put on a boat, and they arrive in the developing world without any vehicle regulation control, inspection. So it's something which needs to be addressed in order that even the most vulnerable are able to have access on a normal, safe vehicle.
Where shall we start from? Where shall we start from?
I was mentioning earlier, my trip before arriving here. I've been in Turkey, I've been in Lebanon, I've been in Pakistan to speak with the government. Earlier I was in Nigeria, in Rwanda. We need to convince the world that it has to change. And again, the private sector has a big role to play. Because you have private sector, petrol company, tire company, who need to contribute. And I'm working also with the global organization like Olympic Committee, like FIFA, UEFA, World Athletic Organization to try to support. As it is the #1 cause of vulnerability for young people, we need influencer. We need people to help, and I I come back to this campaign, JC Deco, influencers, 1,000 cities, 80 countries, who try to convince people to be safer on the roads.
Mr. Todt, thank you very much. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I think now we know what is the price. We know how much road accidents is costing us. It's just about taking the action and having the willpower. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. And again, thank you to FII to give this opportunity, which is absolutely essential because it's the way to wake up this silent pandemic on the road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.